Hello there, and welcome back. Night has fallen, and the world outside has begun to settle into silence. Perhaps you're curled up beneath a warm blanket, with gentle amber light casting shadows on the wall. Maybe beside you is the soft whirring of a fan, or the gentle patter of rain against your window. Wherever you are, allow yourself to simply let go. Take a deep breath in and exhale slowly. Tonight, we won't be seeking stories of grand heroics, earth-shattering battles, or speeches that change the course of history. No. Tonight, we'll listen together to the whispers of the past, stories of everyday life, of small details, of the feeling of rough fabric against skin, the taste of bread toasted over an open fire, the cold that seeps into your very bones on a winter night without central heating. History, after all, isn't only written in royal decrees or on victory banners. It's written in every breath, every meal, every small worry of ordinary people. And tonight, we'll begin with an experience that's truly one of a kind. We'll step back into an age of castles and knights, but forget everything Hollywood has told you. The truth is, you probably wouldn't survive a single day. So, close your eyes. Feel the weight of your body on your comfortable bed. And join me as we begin this journey to a place where survival was an achievement and a good night's sleep was an impossible luxury. And if these stories bring you a bit of peace, a like and subscribe would be tremendous encouragement for me to continue lighting these candles in the past. Now then, let's begin. Congratulations! You've just opened your eyes. That's the only good news you'll hear today. The year is 1325. There's no gentle sunlight filtering through curtains. Your room, if you can call it a room, has no windows. Only thick darkness and a complex aroma. A symphony of human sweat, the damp mustiness of earth, the scent of goat hair, and something vaguely fungal that you hope isn't mold growing on the walls. But deep down, you know it is. You're not lying on a memory foam mattress. No. Your bed is a half-rotted straw mattress, stuffed with dried leaves and countless tiny, uninvited creatures. The fleas consider you a walking buffet. Your only woolen blanket, unwashed since last winter, is now stiff and heavy with accumulated dirt and grease. It weighs about as much as a small calf. Clang, clang, clang. The church bell rings out, not to wake you gently. It's a metallic command, tearing through the morning silence, ruthless and non-negotiable. This is medieval alarm clock, only louder and somehow even less forgiving. You try to stretch your shoulders. An immediate mistake. The air hits your skin like ice, and your joints cry out in crispy protests. You're 22 years old, but by medieval standards, you're middle-aged. Your spine creaks like an old wooden door, and your knees sound like a bag of pebbles being shaken by a confused farmer. And you're not alone. Privacy? That's a luxury concept from an impossible future. Your entire family, parents, siblings, and possibly some random cousin who came to visit and never left, are stirring awake right beside you. No bedrooms, no curtains, just absolute togetherness. You can feel your brother's breath on the back of your neck. Good morning in medieval Europe, where you're never truly alone, because parasites, rodents, and 8 other people are always with you. And this is just the beginning of your day. Nature calls, and it's not calling politely, it's screaming. This is when you begin to desperately miss your modern bathroom. No toilet, no seat, no toilet paper, no flush button, not even a sad, cold plunger sitting in the corner. In the 14th century, answering nature's call was an adventure, a social experiment, and often a small public event. As a peasant, your bathroom is probably a wooden bucket behind the house, and it's already full because Uncle Wolfston had a rough night after eating some bad turnips. The aroma is classic. You hold your breath, do your business, and then, here's the best part. You carry that bucket to a window or doorway. You take a breath and shout something like, Gardez-lou, a corruption of the old French garde l'eau, meaning watch out for the water. And then you dump it straight into the street. That's right, into the street. Medieval town streets were essentially open sewers, a charming river of human waste, animal droppings, leftover food, and mysterious liquids you don't want to investigate. Everyone walks through it. Carts roll through it. Children play beside it. If you're lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines, congratulations. You'll get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in a wooden building where privacy is a myth and ventilation is a cruel joke. People can chat casually, but try not to breathe too deeply. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. Most people use straw, leaves, rags, moss, or if they're feeling especially luxurious, a bit of wool. Sometimes, nothing at all. This probably explains why handshaking hasn't become popular yet. You think it's better in castles, both right and wrong. You might have a garderobe, a hole in the wall that sends your waist straight down to the moat below. Great idea, except your enemies know this. And yes, attackers have sometimes climbed into castles through the waste pipes. Truly, a backdoor entry. So whether you're a peasant or a baron, medieval toilet time is a ritual of humiliation. It's cold, public, dangerous, and never stops being disgusting. One slip on the slick stone path, and you'll be face first in what remains of humanity. And you still haven't brushed your teeth, but we'll get to that later. You've survived the bathroom. You deserve a reward, right? Perhaps a nice breakfast. Something warm, delicious, comforting. Sorry. This is medieval Europe. Nothing is comforting here. Breakfast, if you can call it breakfast, is a grim affair. No eggs Benedict, no coffee maker, and certainly no buttered toast. You squat near the fire, facing a wooden bowl containing something that looks like it was just scraped from a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily portion of pottage. Pottage is a thick, slimy stew made from whatever you can find. Grains, vegetables, maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks. New ingredients are simply dumped on top of the old ones. It's less like a recipe and more like an ongoing culinary experiment. Accompanying this is a piece of bread. It's hard enough to deflect an arrow. It's made from dark barley flour or rough oats, often padded with sawdust, ground acorns, or other creative ingredients, because wheat is a rich person's fantasy. This is not your friend. You don't slice it. You have to negotiate with it. And to drink, you're not sipping orange juice or an oat milk latte. You're drinking ale. Yes, ale. At 6 a.m. Why? Because the water from nearby sources is full of parasites and filth. So you start your day with weak ale, low alcohol content, high survival rate. Children drink it too. Nobody's happy about it, but at least it won't kill you immediately. Want some meat or cheese? Keep dreaming. That's for Sundays and Saints' days, and only if your Lord is feeling generous. Most peasants don't eat meat more than a few times a year. You chew your gritty bread, gulp down your medieval ale, and try not to think about the rat that might have nibbled your porridge bowl during the night. Breakfast doesn't energize you. It simply happens to you. And now that you've been adequately nourished, it's time to work as if your life depends on it. Because it absolutely does. Your wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. One. That's a woolen tunic or linen undergarment that you've worn every day for months, possibly years. There's no concept of seasonal fashion. Just wear this until it disintegrates or gives you fungal infections. Underwear is optional. If you're lucky, maybe a linen undershirt. If not, you're going commando under multiple layers of itchy, sweat-soaked wool. No washing machines, no soap, and absolutely no dry cleaning. So your clothes are stained, stiff, and smell like fermented manure mixed in a pig pen. Even if you wanted to wash them, it's not easy. You'd have to haul water from a river or well, heat it over a fire Scrub your clothes on a board with ash or lye solution and hang them in sunlight, which appears about 3 days a year. All of this means one thing. Your skin hates you. You itch constantly. Fleas, lice, and bed bugs live rent-free on your body. Everyone has them. Flea-ridden nobles, itchy monks, children who are walking insect farms. No one escapes. You'll use a wooden spoon to scratch your armpit while chatting with the local priest, and nobody bothers to notice. Your skin is chafed from friction. Your scalp is a battlefield of bite marks. And if you get a rash, too bad. No dermatologist, no hydrocortisone cream. You just have to endure it. That rash will be your companion for the next 6 months, like an unwanted medieval travel buddy. Now that you've put on your outfit of misery and are wrapped in discomfort, it's time to go outside and start working yourself to death. The sun is barely visible through the perpetual haze of wood smoke and morning mist, but work has already begun. In medieval Europe, there is no concept of a 9-to-5 job, no weekend, no vacation days. There is only work, and the brief intermissions when you're too sick, too injured, or too dead to continue. You trudge toward the fields, your wooden shoes squelching through a mixture of mud, animal droppings, and what you pray is just decomposed vegetable matter. The shoes, if you can call them shoes, are carved from a single piece of wood. They fit about as well as you'd expect. By midday, your feet will be a symphony of blisters and bruises. The fields stretch before you like a brown, churned ocean. This is your world, your prison, your entire universe. Most peasants never travel more than a few miles from where they were born. The next village might as well be on the moon. Your tools are simple, brutally simple. A wooden plow that seems designed more for torturing the earth than cultivating it. A scythe that's been sharpened so many times it's more wish than blade. A hoe that your grandfather's grandfather probably used, passed down through generations like a family curse. The work is backbreaking in the most literal sense. You bend, lift, carry, dig, from sunrise to sunset. Your hands, cracked and bleeding, grip these tools until they become extensions of your aching body. There are no breaks for stretching, no ergonomic considerations. Your spine curves into a permanent question mark. And always, always, there's the mud. Medieval agriculture is essentially farming in a swamp. The fields are waterlogged from poor drainage, creating a thick, sucking paste that clings to everything. It's in your hair, under your fingernails, between your teeth. You'll be tasting earth for weeks. The other peasants work alongside you in a choreographed dance of exhaustion. Nobody talks much. It wastes energy they can't spare. Communication happens through grunts, gestures, and the occasional creative curse word that won't be invented for another few centuries. When someone does speak, it's usually to warn about a tool malfunction or to point out that someone has collapsed. And what are you growing? Mostly oats and barley, crops that can survive in poor soil and terrible weather. Wheat is a luxury crop grown on the Lord's best land. You might see wheat bread once a year at Harvest Festival, and it tastes like heaven wrapped in paradise. The rest of the time, you're cultivating your own future meals of gray, gritty porridge. Every day is a race against disaster. Too much rain, and the crops rot in the field. Too little, and they wither to nothing. Insects can destroy a season's work in days. A late frost can mean famine. You're always one bad weather pattern away from starvation, and you know it. That knowledge sits in your stomach like a cold stone. When you fall ill in medieval times, and you will fall ill, because everyone does, medicine is less about healing and more about accelerating your journey to the afterlife through creative torment. The village physician, if you're fortunate enough to have one, is probably a barber who decided to expand his services. His medical training consists of having watched someone else die while attempting treatment. His diagnostic tools are a sharp knife, a collection of increasingly dubious herbs, and an unshakable confidence in his ability to balance your bodily humors. Feeling under the weather? You need bloodletting. Broken leg? Bloodletting. Heartache? Bloodletting. Pregnancy? You guessed it, bloodletting. The medieval medical establishment has identified bloodletting as the cure for everything except, ironically, blood loss. The process is exactly as delightful as it sounds. The physician will make small cuts in your arms or legs, then apply leeches to suck out what they consider bad blood. These aren't clean, medical-grade leeches. These are whatever slimy creatures they could find in the nearest pond. You'll watch your life force drain away, while the physician nods sagely and explains how much better you're already looking. If bloodletting doesn't work, they'll try balancing your humors through diet modification. Too much yellow bile? Stop eating anything warm or dry. Too much black bile? Avoid all cold, moist foods. Since nobody has any idea what they're talking about, these dietary restrictions usually result in malnutrition on top of your original illness. Herbal remedies sound more promising until you learn what they consist of. Ground unicorn horn, actually powdered narwhal tusk sold at unicorn prices. Eye of newt, probably just mustard seed, but they can't be sure. Mandrake root, genuinely poisonous, but it's supposed to cure everything, so it must be good for you. Surgery exists, technically. It's performed without anesthesia, antiseptics, or any real understanding of anatomy. The survival rate is about what you'd expect from having a blacksmith operate on you with farm tools. Most surgical patients die from infection within days, assuming they survive the initial shock of having their limbs sawed off while fully conscious. Dental care is particularly horrifying. Toothaches are treated by drilling holes in your skull to release evil spirits. Yes, really. Trepanning, the practice of boring holes in heads, is considered cutting-edge neurology. The reasoning is that pain is caused by demons trapped in your skull, so obviously they need an exit route. For less severe dental issues, they might just tie a string to your tooth and the other end to a slamming door. Medieval dentistry operates on the same principle as opening a stubborn jar. If it won't come out easily, apply more force until something breaks. The truly sick are often taken to monasteries, where monks will pray over them while administering holy water. That's probably just regular water, blessed by someone who also hasn't washed his hands. Faith healing is the ultimate medical insurance policy. If you die, it's because God willed it, not because the treatment was criminally negligent. And if all else fails, there's always the option of pilgrimage. Walk hundreds of miles to touch a saint's relics, and maybe you'll be cured. Of course, the journey itself might kill you, but at least you'll die with a positive attitude and very strong leg muscles. Your soul, in medieval times, is in constant mortal peril. Not from any particular sin you've committed, but simply from existing in a world where eternal damnation lurks around every corner, like a particularly persistent door-to-door salesman. The church bells that wake you each morning aren't just timekeepers. They're reminders that your spiritual clock is ticking. Every day is a test you might fail spectacularly, sending you spiraling into hellfire for infractions as minor as working on Sunday or eating meat on Friday. The margin for error is approximately 0. Sunday Mass is not optional. It's as mandatory as breathing and considerably less pleasant. You'll stand for hours in a cold stone building, listening to Latin words you don't understand, while your empty stomach grows increasingly creative in its complaints. The priest, who may or may not be literate, delivers sermons about the torments awaiting sinners with the enthusiasm of someone describing their favorite hobby. These descriptions are wonderfully detailed. Hell is not a vague concept, but a carefully mapped territory of specialized tortures. Gluttons will be force-fed toads and rats for eternity. The prideful will be broken on wheels of fire. Thieves will be boiled in pitch while demons poke them with pitchforks. The medieval imagination, when it comes to eternal punishment, is remarkably creative and disturbingly specific. You can't read the Bible. You can't read anything. So your understanding of Christianity comes entirely through these cheerful weekly updates on divine wrath. Salvation seems to require following an impossibly complex set of rules that change depending on which priest you ask and what mood he's in. Confession is a weekly exercise in creative storytelling. You must confess your sins to a priest who knows everyone in the village and their business. Privacy is not part of the package. You'll admit to impure thoughts about your neighbor's wife while that neighbor stands 3 feet away, also waiting for confession. The prescribed penances are often more challenging than the original sins. Steal a loaf of bread, and you might be required to walk barefoot to the nearest shrine, a journey that could take weeks and quite possibly kill you. The church's approach to rehabilitation involves making you suffer enough that you'll either never sin again or die trying not to. Saints are your only hope for divine intervention, but they're a fickle bunch. Each saint has their specialty. Saint Anthony for lost objects, Saint Apollonia for toothaches, Saint Vitus for dancing plagues. Yes, dancing plagues are a real concern. Sometimes entire villages break out in uncontrollable dancing that lasts for days. Medieval life is weird like that. You'll spend your few spare coins on holy relics, fragments of saints' bones, pieces of the true cross, apparently a tree the size of a small forest, vials of Mary's tears. The authenticity of these items is questionable, but questioning them is heretical, so you buy them anyway and hope for the best. Prayer becomes a constant background activity, like humming. You pray while working, while eating, while trying to sleep. Not because you're particularly devout, but because stopping prayer for any length of time might be interpreted as spiritual negligence. And spiritual negligence leads directly to that unpleasant eternity we discussed earlier. Death is always close enough to touch, but damnation is closer still. In a world where a simple infection can kill you, the real terror isn't dying. It's dying unshriven, unconfessed, unprepared. A sudden death means eternal torment, so you live in constant spiritual anxiety, always one accident away from an infinitely bad forever. Justice in medieval times is swift, public, and designed more for entertainment than rehabilitation. Crime and punishment operate on the principle that if you're going to deter wrongdoing, you might as well make it memorable for everyone involved. Theft is common because hunger is commonplace, but the penalty for stealing food can be more severe than the starvation that drove you to steal in the first place. Take a loaf of bread, and you might lose a hand. The logic is medieval in its simplicity. Can't steal if you can't grab. Public executions are community events, like farmers' markets, but with more screaming. Entire families gather to watch hangings, beheadings, and the occasional drawing and quartering. Children play games between executions. Vendors sell meat pies and ale. It's social hour with a corpse as the centerpiece. The stocks are the medieval equivalent of social media shaming, but with added physical discomfort. Minor offenders are locked in wooden frames in the town square, where citizens can throw rotten vegetables, eggs, and creative insults. It's participatory justice, Everyone gets to feel involved in the punishment process. Trial by ordeal is still occasionally used for serious crimes. The accused might be forced to carry red-hot iron bars or plunge their hands into boiling water. If the wounds heal cleanly, they're innocent. If infection sets in, they're guilty. It's a justice system that doubles as a healthcare screening process, and neither function works particularly well. Village disputes are settled by whoever shouts loudest or owns the biggest stick. Property boundaries are determined through combat, inheritance claims through violence, and romantic rivalries through increasingly elaborate forms of public humiliation. Conflict resolution is less about finding truth and more about identifying who can endure the most physical pain while maintaining their position. The lord of the manor has absolute authority over his peasants, including the right of life and death. He can order executions for crimes as minor as poaching a rabbit from his lands. Of course, his lands include everything you can see in any direction. So, technically, all hunting is poaching unless you're hunting rats in your own hovel. Blood feuds between families can last for generations, passed down like inheritance, but considerably more lethal. Your great-grandfather insulted someone's great-grandfather, so now you're mortal enemies with people you've never met over a slight no one remembers. It's the medieval version of social networking, except instead of unfriending people, you stab them. Women accused of witchcraft face trial by drowning. The logic is elegant in its stupidity. If she drowns, she's innocent, but dead. If she survives, she's a witch and must be burned alive. It's a justice system designed to ensure that the accused always loses, regardless of guilt or innocence. Personal disputes are often settled through trial by combat, where the accused and accuser beat each other with weapons until someone dies or surrenders. God is supposed to ensure that the righteous party wins. But God appears to favor whoever has the better sword and more combat experience. Divine justice has a learning curve. Law enforcement consists mainly of whoever happens to be armed and annoyed at the moment. There are no police, no detectives, no forensic investigators. Crime scenes are examined by whoever shows up first and claims to understand what happened. Evidence is whatever people remember or choose to remember, adjusted for personal grievances and financial considerations. In this world of casual brutality, violence is so commonplace that it becomes background noise, like the sound of wind or the smell of unwashed bodies. You step over blood in the streets the same way you'd step over puddles. Death is a neighbor who visits frequently and never bothers to knock. In medieval times, death doesn't make appointments. It simply arrives, often uninvited and always inconveniently timed, like a relative who shows up during dinner and expects to be fed. you probably won't live to see 40. If you make it to 30, you're doing better than most. If you reach 50, you're practically a walking miracle, assuming you can still walk with joints that sound like grinding coffee beans every time you move. Childhood is particularly hazardous. Of every 10 children born, perhaps 3 or 4 will survive to adulthood. The others succumb to diseases that modern medicine could cure with a prescription and a weekend of rest. Parents don't name their children immediately. There's no point in getting attached to someone who might not be there next week. Death comes in many creative forms. Sometimes it's the plague, sweeping through villages like a particularly thorough house cleaning service, except instead of removing dust, it removes people. Entire families disappear overnight, leaving behind empty houses that nobody wants to enter for fear of catching whatever lingers in the air. Other times, it's famine, a slow, grinding death that gives you plenty of time to consider your life choices while your body consumes itself. You'll eat bark, grass, anything that might contain nutrients. People become walking skeletons, too weak to work, but too alive to stop trying. War brings its own variety of endings. If you're not a soldier, don't assume you're safe. Armies live off the land, which means they live off your food, your livestock, your daughters, and occasionally your life if you object too strenuously to the arrangement. Civilian casualties aren't collateral damage. They're often the primary target. Simple injuries become death sentences. A small cut can fester into a life-ending infection. A broken bone might heal crooked, leaving you disabled and unable to work, which in medieval terms means unable to eat, which means a slow descent into starvation. There's no workers' compensation, no disability benefits, no social safety net of any kind. Women face additional risks. Childbirth is a form of Russian roulette where the odds are terrible and the stakes are your life. For every successful birth, there are stories of mothers who simply didn't survive the process. Giving life often costs life, and everyone knows it, but pretends otherwise because what else can you do? Even the weather can kill you. Winters are harsh beyond modern comprehension. Your one-room dwelling has no insulation, inadequate heating, and drafts that seem personally committed to freezing you to death. People genuinely freeze to death in their sleep, which is perhaps a mercy considering the alternatives. And yet, somehow, people continue. They fall in love, have children, tell jokes, sing songs, and hope for better days. Life continues not because it's pleasant, but because the alternative is giving up. And giving up ensures the very outcome everyone's trying to avoid. Each day you survive is a small victory. Each night you fall asleep and wake up the next morning is a minor miracle. In a world where death is always present, simply being alive becomes an achievement worth celebrating, even if the celebration consists of nothing more than another bowl of watery porridge and the prospect of doing it all again tomorrow. Your medieval day is ending now. The sun sets earlier than you'd like. Darkness falls like a heavy blanket, and you crawl back onto your straw mattress alongside your extended family and their various parasites. You're exhausted, hungry, dirty, and itchy. Your joints ache, your muscles burn, and your stomach grumbles its complaints about another day of inadequate nutrition. But you're alive. And in medieval times, being alive at the end of the day is the only success story that matters. Now, let us leave behind the mud and misery of the peasant's world. Let us wipe clean our dirt-stained feet and abandon the stench of rotting straw. We shall travel through several centuries and enter a different realm entirely. A world of silk and jewels and whispered secrets and shadowy corners. Welcome to the court of Queen Elizabeth I. But do not let the grandeur deceive you. This, too, is a cage, merely gilded with gold. Before she became Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the symbol of a golden age, Elizabeth was simply a girl living in fear. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, had been executed on the orders of her own father, King Henry VIII. Elizabeth, from a princess, suddenly became an inconvenient bastard child, an embarrassing reminder of royal mistakes. Her childhood was a harsh lesson in silence and caution. She learned to observe, to hide her sharp intelligence behind a facade of modest humility. When her half-sister, Mary I, a fanatical Catholic, ascended the throne, Elizabeth found herself imprisoned in the Tower of London. Imagine, if you will, sitting in a cold stone chamber, the only light filtering through a narrow, cramped window overlooking the dark Thames. Every footstep in the corridor could be the executioner's approach. Every opening door could signal the final summons. She lived through each day like this, with a book in her hands and a frozen heart. It was in this solitude and danger that her first mask was forged. The tower walls were thick, built to contain both prisoners and secrets. Elizabeth's chamber was Spartanly furnished. A narrow bed with rough wool blankets, a wooden table scarred by previous occupants' desperate scratchings, a single chair that creaked with age and dampness. During those months of imprisonment, she developed habits that would serve her throughout her reign. She woke before dawn, not by choice, but because uncertainty made sleep elusive. The pre-dawn hours became her private sanctuary, time stolen from a world that wanted to control every moment of her existence. She read voraciously. Classical texts, religious treatises, anything that could transport her mind beyond the confining walls. Reading became both escape and armor, filling her intellect with the tools she would later use to outmaneuver England's enemies and her own nobles' ambitions. The food in the tower was barely adequate, designed to sustain life without providing comfort. Watery porridge, coarse bread, occasional scraps of salted meat that tasted more of preservation than nourishment. She learned to eat slowly, to make each meal last, because meals marked time and time was all she had. But perhaps most importantly, she learned to wear faces. When guards looked through her door's small window, they saw a compliant, pious young woman reading her prayer book. They could not see the sharp mind cataloging every detail, memorizing every guard's routine, noting every weakness in the tower's supposedly impregnable security. When Elizabeth finally ascended the throne, she was a young woman in a world dominated by men. Everyone expected her to marry, produce an heir, and transfer power to a husband. But Elizabeth had different plans. She declared herself married to England. To maintain power, she needed to create an image that transcended gender, that rose above human frailty. She became the Virgin Queen, an almost divine symbol. And central to that image was her face. A face of pristine white, flawless as marble statuary. This was not natural beauty. This was a carefully constructed mask. The white powder was called Venetian ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar. Yes, lead, a potent neurotoxin. Every day she painted her face with poison. It covered the smallpox scars that disease had left behind, but it also slowly consumed her skin from within. It caused hair loss, permanent skin damage, and likely contributed to her later health problems. Her makeup was not merely cosmetic. It was armor. It was a statement. But the price for that perfect mask was slow destruction from within. Each morning, she layered death onto herself in order to live as a goddess. The application process was elaborate, almost ritualistic. Her ladies-in-waiting would begin before dawn, first cleansing her face with rose water and honey, then carefully applying the lead-based ceruse with brushes made from fine animal hair. The mixture had to be perfectly smooth, without streaks or imperfections that might reveal the humanity beneath. Over the white base came additional layers: rouge made from cinnabar, mercury sulfide, another toxic compound, to provide the faint flush of life to her marble cheeks. Her lips were painted with a mixture containing more lead, this time tinted with cochineal, a red dye made from crushed insects. The eyebrows, often lost to the lead poisoning, were painted on with coal made from antimony, yet another poisonous metal. Every element of her royal visage was toxic, but the effect was undeniably powerful. She became porcelain, untouchable, divine. But beneath the mask, her real skin grew increasingly damaged. The lead caused open sores that had to be covered with ever thicker applications of the same poison that created them. It was a vicious cycle of beauty and destruction, played out daily on the canvas of her face. Her teeth, stained black from the sugar that was becoming fashionable among the wealthy, were another casualty of royal privilege. Sugar was so expensive that rotted teeth became a status symbol, proof that one could afford the sweet luxury that destroyed dental health. Elizabeth's blackened smile was, perversely, a display of wealth. A Queen's Day was not one of leisure. It was an endless sequence of rituals and duties, each more exhausting than the last. She woke early, not by choice, but by necessity. The business of ruling began before dawn and extended well past sunset. Her private chambers were never truly private. The dressing process consumed hours. Dozens of layers of clothing, tightly laced corsets, and gowns so heavy with thousands of pearls and gemstones that they could exhaust an ordinary person just from their weight. Her meals were public performances. Dozens of dishes were presented, but she ate only small portions. Every morsel had to be tasted by food tasters to guard against poison. The majority of her day was spent in audiences with advisors, reading and responding to mountains of correspondence, receiving foreign ambassadors. She had to weigh every word, every gesture. Her court was a web of intrigue and flattery. She had to use charm to control powerful men, making promises of marriage to European princes that she never intended to fulfill. In 1588, when Philip II of Spain sent his supposedly invincible armada to conquer England, Elizabeth faced the greatest test of her reign. But even this moment of national crisis became another performance in her elaborate royal theater. The famous speech at Tilbury, where she declared she had the body of a weak and feeble woman, but the heart and stomach of a king, was carefully choreographed. She appeared before her troops in a silver breastplate, mounted on a white horse, every detail calculated for maximum dramatic impact. But what the history books don't always capture is the weeks of private terror that preceded that moment. Elizabeth, behind closed doors, was a woman facing the very real possibility of invasion, defeat, and death. Spanish plans included her assassination or forced conversion to Catholicism. She knew that failure meant not just the loss of her throne, but likely her life. Her private chambers during those tense weeks became a war room. Maps covered every surface. Messengers arrived at all hours, and the Queen slept in her clothes, ready to flee at a moment's notice. The weight of an entire nation's survival rested on her shoulders, and those shoulders, despite the armor of queenship, belonged to a mortal woman who felt fear as acutely as any of her subjects. The victory, when it came, was as much due to storms and Spanish naval incompetence as to English courage. But Elizabeth understood the power of narrative. She transformed a narrow escape into a divinely ordained triumph, cementing her legend as a queen, blessed by God and protected by England's superior virtue. The celebration that followed was another exhausting performance. Weeks of public ceremonies, religious services, and court festivities, all requiring Elizabeth to appear radiant, grateful, and divinely confident. Even victory demanded its toll in public performance. As Elizabeth aged, the isolation of power became increasingly apparent. She had sacrificed marriage and motherhood for the throne, trading personal happiness for political necessity. The court that surrounded her was filled with people who wanted something from her, not people who knew her. Her closest relationships were with her advisors, men like William Cecil and Francis Walsingham. But even these were fundamentally professional. They served the queen, not the woman. She never had friends in the way ordinary people understand friendship. Every relationship was colored by the reality of her position. People couldn't simply enjoy her company. They were always aware they were in the presence of royal power. Spontaneous laughter, casual conversation, genuine intimacy. These normal human pleasures were largely impossible for someone who was never truly off duty. The question of marriage haunted her reign. Parliament constantly pressured her to wed and produce an heir, while she used the possibility of marriage as a diplomatic tool, dangling the promise before foreign princes to secure alliances and trade agreements. But the cost of this strategy was the gradual closing of romantic possibilities as she aged beyond childbearing years. By her 50s, Elizabeth was trapped by her own success. She had created an image of virgin purity and divine protection that she could never abandon without destroying the mystique that kept her in power. She became a prisoner of her own legend, unable to age gracefully or acknowledge human frailty. Her later years were marked by increasing paranoia and arbitrary cruelty. The execution of Essex, once a favorite, demonstrated how thoroughly power had isolated her from normal human emotions. She could no longer afford to trust anyone completely, because trust was a luxury that could destroy the throne. Elizabeth's death in 1603 was, like her life, a carefully managed performance. Even dying, she had to consider the political implications of every gesture, every word. She refused to name her successor until the very end, using even her final breaths as tools of statecraft. The queen, who had spent 45 years painting poison on her face, wearing uncomfortable costumes and performing royalty for audiences that never saw her as fully human, died as she had lived, alone in the essential ways that matter most, surrounded by people who served the crown rather than loved the woman. Her legacy was magnificent and tragic in equal measure. She had saved England from foreign conquest, established it as a naval power, and presided over a cultural flowering that included Shakespeare and Marlowe. But the cost had been her own humanity, sacrificed piece by piece on the altar of royal necessity. The Virgin Queen died a virgin not because she was pure, but because she was trapped. The mask she wore to gain power had become her face, and the face beneath, the real Elizabeth, had been slowly poisoned by the very cosmetics that made her appear divine. Let us cross the vast Atlantic Ocean. Let us come to a new land, wild and full of promise, but also full of secrets that remain unsolved to this day. This is the story of a dream that vanished into thin air, the story of the lost colony of Roanoke. In the year 1587, more than 100 English men, women, and children boarded ships, leaving their homeland behind to seek a new life in America. They were not conquistadors or soldiers, but families. They carried seeds, tools, and hope. They came to Roanoke Island, a small strip of land off the coast of what is now North Carolina. Under the leadership of Governor John White, they began building a settlement. They repaired old houses, erected a defensive palisade, and attempted to establish relationships with the local native tribes. Virginia Dare, John White's granddaughter, was born there. She was the first English child born in the New World. Her birth seemed like a good omen, a promise of a bright future stretching ahead like an endless horizon. The island itself was a place of natural beauty that must have seemed like paradise to English eyes accustomed to crowded, smoky cities. Ancient oak trees, draped with Spanish moss, created cathedral-like spaces where sunlight filtered through in golden shafts. Salt marshes stretched toward the mainland, alive with the calls of herons and the splash of fish jumping in tidal creeks. The settlers built their homes with a mixture of optimism and practical caution. They used local materials, cypress wood that resisted rot, clay for chinking walls, palmetto fronds for roofing. They planted English crops alongside native varieties they learned about from friendly tribal members. Corn, beans, and squash grew beside barley and wheat brought from home. But their supplies ran dangerously low. Tensions with some local tribes began to escalate. John White was forced to make a difficult decision: return to England to seek additional aid. He promised to return as quickly as possible. He bid farewell to his wife, daughter, and newborn granddaughter. He had no way of knowing it would be the last time he would ever see them. The war between England and Spain delayed John White's return journey. 3 long years passed before he could sail back to Roanoke. 3 years of wondering, worrying, imagining what might have happened to the people he loved most in the world. Imagine yourself as John White, standing on the ship's deck as it approaches the island. Your heart beats irregularly with anticipation and dread. 3 years. You wonder what your daughter looks like now, how much your granddaughter has grown, whether they still remember your voice when they reached shore on an August morning in 1590. An unnatural silence greeted them. No children's laughter echoing through the trees, no smoke rising from cooking fires, no one running to welcome them home. They walked into the settlement, footsteps unnaturally loud in the profound quiet. It was completely deserted. The houses still stood, but empty as abandoned shells. Weeds had begun growing through floorboards. There were no signs of battle, no bodies, no skeletons. It was as if more than 100 human beings had simply evaporated. Personal belongings remained scattered about. Cooking pots, children's toys, half-finished needlework, left as if someone had just set it down for a moment. But the people were gone, vanished as completely as if they had never existed at all. The defensive palisade remained intact, showing no signs of attack or siege. If there had been violence, it had been swift and complete, leaving no trace of struggle. More puzzling still, many valuable items remained untouched. Hardly the pattern one would expect from raiders interested in plunder. White searched every building, calling out names of family and friends, hoping against hope to hear a familiar voice answer from the shadows. But the only responses came from birds disturbed by his intrusion, taking flight with harsh cries that seemed to mock his desperate hope. White and his men searched desperately for clues. They examined every building, every path, every cleared area where the colonists might have left some sign of their fate or destination. Before leaving 3 years earlier, White had instructed them that if they were forced to move, they should carve their destination into a tree. If they were in danger, they should add a cross. And then they found it. Carved into a post of the defensive palisade was a single word, etched clearly and without apparent haste. Croatoan. Just that, nothing more. No cross indicating distress. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, home to the friendly Manteo tribe. Could this be the answer? Had the settlers moved there to live among the native people who had welcomed them? But the word raised as many questions as it answered. Why had they left? A storm was approaching. Dark clouds building on the horizon like an advancing army. White desperately wanted to sail to Croatoan Island to search for his family. But his ship's crew, fearing the weather, refused to risk the dangerous waters around the island. The wind was rising, and experience had taught them that Atlantic storms could destroy ships and drown entire crews without warning. Reluctantly, heartbroken, White was forced to abandon his search and return to England. he would never have another opportunity to return to America. He died never knowing what happened to his family, carrying that uncertainty like a stone in his heart for the rest of his days. The mystery of the lost colony has endured for over 4 centuries. Where did they go? What happened to more than 100 men, women, and children who seemed to disappear without a trace? Perhaps they joined the Croatoan tribe and were gradually absorbed into native society. Later genetic evidence and oral traditions seem to support this theory. Or maybe they attempted to sail back to England on their own and were lost at sea. They might have been attacked by a hostile tribe and taken captive, scattered to different villages throughout the region. Perhaps they tried to walk overland to other English settlements, unaware of the vast distances involved. Disease could have killed them all, and the survivors might have wandered into the wilderness to die alone. Some theories are more exotic. Could they have been taken by Spanish forces and transported to missions in Florida or the Caribbean? Spain considered English settlements in America to be illegal intrusions and had both the motive and means to eliminate them. But no Spanish records of such an operation have ever been found. Modern archaeology has found tantalizing clues, but no definitive answers. Excavations on Roanoke Island have uncovered English artifacts mixed with native materials, suggesting some level of cultural exchange. Investigations on Hatteras Island, the modern name for Croatoan, have revealed English artifacts from the late 16th century. Pieces of pottery, metalwork, and other items that could have belonged to the lost colonists. But again, the evidence is suggestive rather than conclusive. Recent discoveries have included a small gold signet ring that might have belonged to someone from the colony, and copper pieces that could have been English trade goods. Each find generates excitement and hope for a breakthrough, but the full truth remains elusive. Scientific techniques like ground-penetrating radar and DNA analysis have been applied to the mystery, but the passage of time has obscured much of the physical evidence. 4 centuries of weather, vegetation growth, and human activity have scattered or destroyed many clues that might have provided answers. The most haunting aspect of the Roanoke mystery is not what happened to the colonists, but what their disappearance represents. They came to the New World with dreams of a better life, carrying hopes and fears common to all human migration. They were families seeking opportunity, parents wanting better futures for their children, individuals brave enough or desperate enough to leave everything familiar behind. Their vanishing stands as a reminder of how fragile human plans can be when set against the vast indifference of history and geography. Despite all our preparations and precautions, despite our tools and knowledge and careful planning, we remain vulnerable to forces beyond our control or understanding. The lost colony has become America's most enduring mystery precisely because it touches something deep in our collective imagination. It represents the terrifying possibility that we too might simply disappear, leaving behind only questions and the wind moving through empty spaces where we once lived and loved and hoped for tomorrow. In the end, perhaps the mystery itself is more powerful than any solution could be. The unanswered questions keep the lost colonists alive in our imaginations in a way that a definitive explanation might not. They exist in the realm of possibility, where all outcomes remain potential and hope survives alongside uncertainty. The word Croatoan, carved into that wooden post, has become one of history's most famous messages, a communication across centuries that we can read but not fully understand. It speaks to us still, whispering questions we cannot answer about people who trusted in tomorrow and found themselves lost in time. And sometimes, when the wind moves through the ancient oaks of Roanoke Island, you might imagine you hear other whispers, the voices of Virginia Dare and her family, still calling across the centuries, still hoping someone will finally understand what happened on that small island where dreams came to build a new world and instead found only mystery. And now, for our final story tonight, we travel to a place where logic appears to have been temporarily suspended. A tale so strange it feels like a fever dream. A reminder that sometimes history is not just tragic or mysterious. Sometimes it's simply absurd. Welcome to Australia, 1932. Welcome to the Great Emu War. Imagine you're a farmer in Western Australia during the Great Depression. You're a World War I veteran, given a patch of scrubland by the government with promises of a better life. You've worked tirelessly to grow wheat on soil that seems personally opposed to agriculture. And then they arrive. Not an invading army, not drought or flood, but an army of approximately 20,000 emus. Large, flightless birds standing nearly 6 feet tall, with legs like steel pistons and an infinite appetite for destruction. These magnificent creatures, Australia's second largest birds, had migrated from the interior and discovered your wheat fields. To them, this was an all-you-can-eat buffet of unprecedented proportions. They consumed wheat, destroyed fences, and generally created chaos with the enthusiasm of tourists discovering free samples at a grocery store. The emus were not malicious, merely hungry and numerous. They moved across the landscape like a feathered flood, devouring months of hard labor in days. What made them particularly frustrating was their apparent intelligence. They seemed to understand that the wheat fields were human creations, which made them either more attractive or more satisfying to destroy. It was impossible to tell which. These were not small, delicate birds that could be frightened away with scarecrows or loud noises. Emus are formidable creatures, capable of running at speeds up to 30 miles per hour, with powerful legs that can deliver kicks strong enough to break bones. The desperate farmers petitioned the government for help. They had survived the trenches of France, they argued, only to be defeated by oversized chickens in their own backyard. Surely the government could do something about this agricultural invasion. The government, in a moment of inexplicable bureaucratic logic, decided this was indeed a military matter. Defense Minister Sir George Pearce dispatched Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery, along with 2 soldiers and 2 Lewis machine guns, to solve the emu problem. These were the same machine guns that had been used on European battlefields, weapons designed to mow down advancing infantry. Picture this scene: a seasoned military officer, a veteran of genuine warfare, equipped with weapons that had helped win the Great War, deployed to engage birds. The initial confidence was sky high. How could they possibly fail? The war began. Major Meredith and his men located a group of about 50 EMUs. They set up their machine gun and waited for the perfect moment to strike. This was going to be a textbook operation, swift, efficient, and thoroughly one-sided. They opened fire. Instead of panicking and running in a predictable direction, the emus immediately scattered into small groups and fled in every conceivable direction. They proved remarkably agile for such large birds, dodging and weaving with an almost supernatural ability to avoid machine gun fire. The Lewis gun, designed to sweep across static battlefield positions, proved completely inadequate against fast-moving, unpredictable targets. After hundreds of rounds were fired, only a few emus had been hit. The majority had vanished into the scrubland, apparently unimpressed by humanity's military technology. The soldiers tried different tactics. They mounted a machine gun on a truck to pursue the emus directly, but the terrain was too rough for accurate shooting from a moving vehicle. What became particularly galling was the emu's apparent tactical intelligence. The lead bird, soldiers swore there was always a lead bird, seemed capable of warning the others of danger. When humans appeared with weapons, the entire flock would disperse with military precision, as if they had studied guerrilla warfare manuals. The emus had developed what could only be described as battlefield awareness. They posted sentries while feeding, maintained communication across the flock, and executed coordinated retreats that would have impressed human commanders. They had, in effect, turned pest control into asymmetric warfare. Major Meredith, in his official reports, wrote with grudging respect, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks." This was not hyperbole. The emus demonstrated remarkable resilience. Even when hit, they often continued running, apparently able to absorb damage that would stop most creatures. Local newspapers began covering the conflict, with barely concealed amusement. Headlines spoke of advances and retreats in the Emu War, treating it as a legitimate military campaign. After nearly a week of combat, with thousands of rounds expended and only a few dozen emus eliminated, the military was forced to withdraw in embarrassment. One journalist wrote that the Australian Army had officially declared victory belonged to the emus. The Great Emu War was over. The birds had won. It was a military defeat that was both hilarious and completely real. The emus returned to their wheat-eating ways with renewed confidence. Having survived machine gun attacks, they seemed to regard farmers' traditional scare tactics with contempt. The farmers, still faced with their emu problem, began developing non-military solutions. Better fencing, guard dogs, and modified farming practices gradually proved more effective than machine guns. The Great Emu War became a source of national embarrassment and international amusement. But beneath the humor lay serious lessons about the unexpected consequences of ecological disruption. The emu invasion had been partly caused by human activities. Clearing land for agriculture had altered migration patterns and concentrated wildlife in areas where conflict with humans was inevitable. The war also demonstrated the limitations of applying military solutions to civilian problems. The emus had effectively pioneered a form of biological guerrilla warfare, using mobility, terrain knowledge, and adaptive tactics to defeat a technologically superior opponent. Perhaps most importantly, the Great Emu War highlighted the danger of underestimating non-human intelligence. The emus had proven capable of learning, adapting, and coordinating their responses to human threats. They had turned a simple pest control operation into a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. The Great Emu War stands as one of history's most bizarre conflicts, a genuine military operation that reads like satire. It reminds us that reality is often stranger than fiction, and that sometimes the most serious people doing the most serious things can find themselves in situations so absurd that the only appropriate response is laughter. In a world full of tragic wars and bitter conflicts, perhaps we need the occasional reminder that not all battles are fought for noble causes or remembered for their heroism. Sometimes, history simply decides to be ridiculous, and the wisest response is to appreciate the absurdity rather than pretend it makes sense. The emus won their war through superior tactics, better adaptation, and the simple virtue of being exactly what they were: magnificent, stubborn, and utterly unimpressed by human pretensions to military superiority. In defeating the Australian Army, they achieved something no foreign military force has ever accomplished. They made an entire nation laugh at itself while simultaneously earning genuine respect for their unexpected competence. And so, our journey tonight comes to an end. We have awakened in the cold of a medieval hovel, feeling the itch of woolen clothes and tasting the blandness of survival meals. We have stood in the shadows of a palace, witnessing a queen paint herself with poisonous masks of power and solitude. We have listened to wind howling through a ghost village where more than 100 souls vanished, leaving only a single word carved in wood. And we have smiled at the absurdity of a war where humans lost to flightless birds, reminding us that sometimes the greatest enemy of dignity is our own overconfidence. History, when viewed up close, is not a straight line. It is a tapestry woven from countless threads, threads of endurance, of ambition, of mystery, and yes, of humor too. It is the story of humanity, with all our complexity, tragedy, and strange beauty. And perhaps, in listening to these stories, we realize something important. We are incredibly fortunate. Fortunate to have warm beds to sleep in. Fortunate to have clean water to drink. Fortunate to have delicious food to eat. Fortunate to live without fearing that a small scratch might cost us our lives. Now, let these stories dissolve into your dreams. Let the echoes of the past lull you into deep and peaceful sleep. No more harsh church bells, no more palace intrigues, only the warmth of your blanket and the quiet of the night. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Sleep well, and perhaps we'll meet again in another historical dream. Good night.